Welcome, welcome, welcome. I got a little bit confused yesterday, thinking it was the 11th. I'm actually recording this on Monday the 11th. I just noticed 11 seconds in as I've said that. No coincidence with anything. So, the topic, as mentioned yesterday, the artificial sun. Let's have a think about those two words and how often are they said, but have you really stopped to consider the complexity, the logistics of such a thing? What are we talking about when we're saying artificial? Are we talking about something manufactured, something man-made, for it to be artificial? Would it come, say, like a cell phone, where the circuitry is all there, but the ability of things it can do would be dependent on downloading a new app, for example? My own experience that I can recall connected to the sun, I believe it was the year 2014 into the year 2015. Now, in 2014, I had no problems, no concerns about during the summer not wearing a t-shirt, having bare arms, that kind of thing. But 2015, that was very different. The sun had that intense burning feel about it, and something inside me said, you better stay covered up, don't expose yourself any more than you have to. So that entire year I only ever exposed my hands and my face to this sun, which is an intense bright white that I don't recall it being prior to that. Since moving, I can't actually make a comparison. What are we in, 2023? So 8 years ago. I can't say it's any better or worse because I'm in a different location than I was at the time, but certainly my experience this summer, it's been a matter of life or death for a lot of plants, and no amount of watering is stopping the leaves and things getting sunburnt, basically. Short of putting up sunshades for so many plants, which would be impractical to do, it's really just do as much as you can to try and help the plants. And the majority have survived, and now we've transitioned into September. The temperature has dropped. This is, I'm referring to here in the Algarve in Portugal. Can't speak for the rest of the world. So let's have a look at this sun, this artificial sun. And by that I don't mean actually go and stare at it. I'm not referring to sun gazing. I'm just trying to think the way to go with this one now. So man-made, artificial, maybe it has dormant component parts or certain items that can be activated on it. Maybe do certain things. Maui comes to mind, for example. There seems from a lot of this video footage that I've seen on social media and the evidence, which is inexplicable. I'm thinking of Paradise in California, where fires can just suddenly stop and form a straight line, and the things that you'd expect to be combustible, like trees, seem to be remaining intact, but such things as aluminum wheels on cars, things that would require quite a temperature. I think, don't quote me on these figures, but I'm pretty certain aluminum is something in the 2000s Fahrenheit range before its melting point. So you have to wonder about, when you see the footage, assuming the footage is genuine, of course, because how much can you really trust on social media? As an aside note here, as I record this episode 21, episode 20 is about to start, I mentioned a Rudolf Steiner lecture in which he talks about how can you trust the senses. I was unable to find that particular video so far. It's somewhere in the playlist because I have listened to rather a lot of Rudolf Steiner of late. I have a feeling it's on one of these sort of marathon ones between 7 and 11 hours. But if I do find it and hear it again, I will be sure to put it in a link in the description of a subsequent video to this one. But I have given you two Rudolf Steiners in that. That's your sort of your homework, that and the James True, two videos. So you're looking probably about 2 hours in total. It's not a lot. And of course, you can alter the playback speed in the settings so you could hear it at 1.5 times. This is partly why I speak slow down like this, so it gives you the option, if you're daunted by, oh, that video's X amount of time, well, you can speed it up and still hear it all. And of course, use your discernment. If you feel drawn to a particular video or a particular channel, then go with it. If you don't, then don't. It comes down to being non-judgmental. I'm going off on a little tangent again. You'll see there's probably a couple, if you're looking at this channel, you'll see there's a couple of shorts where I've had the delight and pleasure of seeing a cactus flower, and it's just an amazing thing to see. But part of this experience of today, it's 1 minute it's been sunny, the next minute it's been raining, or it's blue skies and white clouds, then it's dark clouds. But it just is, and just let it all pass, because I was only saying in a video call earlier, after you've had the rain, when the sun comes out, to me there is that very magical period where all of nature is wet and gleaming and looking very green, and then the sun comes out and you get that beautiful feeling and that beautiful smell of everything coming to life, that vibrancy. And for that to happen follows that pattern of, you'll be presented with something that looks negative. In this particular case, it'd be like, oh no, it's dark rain clouds, and you may have had something planned on that day which would involve an outside activity which the rain actually prevents from happening. But rather than be judgmental on it, just let it pass, because like it happened today, after the rain had passed, it opens up this spectacular, magical experience of sunshine and seeing everything coming back to life and feeling it and sensing it. It's a wonderful experience. But it's not being judgmental about the weather. It's just you can't change it. That comes down to that saying of recognize what you can change and recognize what you can't change. And of course, the only thing you can really change is how you feel about things inside yourself. So to get back on topic, the artificial sun. So yeah, now the next part of this would be, how big would this thing have to be, this artificial sun or this sun simulator? Now the perception a lot of people seem to have is when you look up at the sky, you're looking at an artificial sun. I can see why. But how would that even be possible? How big would that thing need to be? From the perspective of being on Earth and moving around and still seeing this same sun with this white intensity, would it not be more feasible, leaving aside even how would you keep that thing up in the air above you anyway, and how would you keep it perfectly aligned so when anybody sort of looks in that direction, they're not going to see a perceived genuine sun that is behind that. They'll only see what is in front of it, i.e. this artificial sun. So let's maybe look at this the other way round. Let's come down to Earth, as it were, again. I speculated and theorized on this as being a possible answer before. Imagine, if you will, and this may be the reason why the Arctic Circle seems to be a no-fly zone, a no-go zone, a no public prying eyes zone. What if what you're seeing up in the sky, be it daytime or nighttime, is just purely projected images onto a screen? So what I'm suggesting is it's something not unlike one of those mobiles that you would have in a young child's bedroom that projects a picture up onto the ceiling and revolves around. So you've got sort of cartoon comic sort of depictions of the moon with a smiley face and stars and things. But maybe that is exactly what we are looking at when you see the sky. All these little lights. I mean, are all these stars these fantastical distances, or is it that they're just some kind of lights of different sizes and they're not actually that far apart from each other at all? Because take any of these constellations, take Orion's belt, and you look at the constituent 3 stars, and you look at what's said about the distances, they're nowhere near each other. So why is it then, from our perspective of observation with the physical eyes, that the distances between these stars that make up a particular constant never seems to vary? They seem to be fixed, which defies the sort of thing you would see in relation to far distance and foreground if you were looking out of a window of say a train. The relative position of the things in the foreground and the distant ground would change, but not so with the stars, apparently. Now, it's often spoken about that this reality is backwards, it's inverse. Well, to use something Lana A LaBonte has mentioned, the universe is you inverse. If you look at a lot of spiritual messages, spiritual channels, talking about the esoteric and such like, it's spoken of in terms that the world, the external world, is all a projection from your mind. And as things seem to follow these blueprint patterns in this reality, that is to say, that what you create in your imagination, if you see it through to the end, becomes manifest in the physical external reality. And that seems to follow a pattern. So what if it's not just we are projecting onto this natural green screen and we're observing our innermost feelings reflected back at us? Then maybe, just maybe, what you're actually seeing is a back projection, in the same way it's spoken of about radio transmissions being bounced off a dome. So imagine if you've got something like a light that's beaming upwards, which you would look up at the sky and perceive to be the sun. But what you're actually seeing is like a mirror, as it were. Now, going back to something I mentioned in these earlier talks, the difference between a shadow and a reflection is the axis of the polarities. That is to say that the shadow will be true on its linear axis. Your left side will go left, your right side will go right. As you move, the shadow replicates that, but due to its your relative position to a light source will depend on whether that shadow is long or short, so it doesn't duplicate your vertical axis. Now, the opposite of that, there's a pun there, the opposite of that is the reflection, where your vertical axis is true. But observe in the mirror, when you go left, that mirrored image is actually going to the right. What you're perceiving in the mirror, the left now becomes the right now becomes the left. So I am suggesting here that the sky that you see above you is like a giant lens, because I've suggested this as a giant eyeball. And it's refreshing to hear, it's quite a while ago now, must be over 2 years, Lavette, she mentioned on her channel exactly the same thing. Quite independently, we've never spoken to each other, or I've left comments on a few videos, but that's as far as it goes. So there was no comparison or discussion before each of us put out our respective videos that weren't even at the same time. Synchronized thoughts, I think you'd call that, and it's happening again. Listening to what James True was saying about the Y chromosome, the leavened bread, and the speculation of what happens, what was the reason for this whole thing about sticking to a strict diet at this particular time. And Passover, it's basically where the sun passes over the equator from the Tropic of Capricorn to the Tropic of Cancer. So you're moving from winter to summer, where the length of daylight hours is getting longer. So that's all a Passover means, but yeast and Easter. It seems very strange how those two words are both connected to that spring event. On an aside note here, one of the things often used as a form of weaponized attack by anybody of a Christian, I was going to say persuasion, a Christian affliction, I think is a better terminology, would say, oh, don't touch tarot cards, don't do divining, don't do this, it's evil, you shouldn't do any of that. Well, I'm sorry. Would you like to explain to me why Easter doesn't have a fixed date and why it is always set as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox, the spring equinox? If that isn't observance of the stars and astrology, and let's face it, the whole biblical narrative is one of prophecy, therefore it is one of prediction. So once again, these people that have these limiting belief systems, not just Christianity, but I'm using that one because that is the one that I've had to endure and subjected to more than any other religion. So it's the one I'm able to speak of from personal experience. It is a form of mental abuse as well when you're sort of, as a young child, you're basically forced against your better judgment, your inner knowing, to go along to these things, which are basically a sort of form of a cult that, with a promise of an afterlife, with no guarantees and no proof whatsoever. You just have to have blind faith in it. But that will be your crucifixion by doing that, by nailing yourself to that belief system. But each to their own. If you just use some rationale and some logic and look at some of these passages and how they would seem to conflict because it is being read from a literalist, materialist perspective, of course it doesn't make sense. It's not to be interpreted that way. It's been highly corrupted, redacted, edited, and so on. So we've got this artificial sun. So maybe it's not so much it's an artificial sun. Would it not be far more practical to actually put some sort of lens over the top of the projected light beam, which would then give the appearance of an artificial sun, because it has some sort of filter in the way? Now, where do all the other parts fit into this, like the stars, the constellations, and the moon and everything? Well, if the sun is a projection from the North Pole, as it were, Mount Meru, if you want to call it that, who knows what is at this perceived North Pole, because without being able to actually go there and verify it independently for ourselves, and of course Google Earth seems to not want to go up that high for some reason. It won't let you see it. Not that I would trust what's actually been shown anyway. But I only have feeling to go on this one. Now imagine if you were, shall we say, a fiend who had a very deep knowledge of the intricacies of astrology, that you could somehow manipulate and change frequencies of these so-called planets, Venus, right through to Pluto, Uranus, the whole lot, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and so on, Mercury, Saturn, pretty much listed the whole lot. you could probably put some sort of filter in the way of those as well, and you could probably alter the frequency, knowing that it has a direct effect. There is certainly an interaction, there is no denying that. Many people talk about how they have difficulty sleeping when it is a full moon. Again, something I've personally experienced, not knowing it was a full moon because I wasn't following astrology, but there were times when I was very restless and couldn't sleep, and then found out afterwards it was because it was either a new moon or a full moon. I can't remember specifics of it, but to me that was a proof of it, and also another proof, as much as you can trust the senses in the external. There is a feel good factor to when you're in sunlight as opposed to being in shadow. Unless, of course, you don't like the really warm weather and don't like the really hot sun, for example. Each their own. I'm not saying you have to or don't. We all have our preferences on temperatures and things. I would personally hope that whatever climate that you find yourself in would be a climate that is conducive to your well-being. And if not, then I would take active steps to try and remedy it by moving to somewhere where you do have a temperature that will benefit you in the health in your health. This has certainly been the case for myself. The colder, damper weather of the UK, I didn't mind the summer, but I never coped very well with winters. I definitely had that sort of what is called that winter depression from the lack of sunshine. So since moving to this area, for example, I'm no longer using a walking stick. I've had no problems whatsoever with my leg. Many people have commented. I changed the profile picture on Facebook, which I don't really go on Facebook, forgetting that it's going to become a post for everybody to see. Because I probably wouldn't have done it if I'd have remembered that, because it's like a vanity ego thing. Everybody's saying, "Oh, you look this or you look that," but which is very nice to have these compliments, but consistently the message a lot of people have said to me and in person is, "You look younger," and I definitely feel healthy. I definitely feel fitter for this move. So I would recommend to anybody, if you don't like the real cold weather, then do what you can to move somewhere warmer. Obviously, there's no. This is the opposite of what you're given in materialism. In like with clothing, for example, there is no one size fits all. I can only speak from experience, and I invite you to take whatever you can from these messages and apply it to your own lives and your own circumstances, which will be uniquely tailored just to you and your life story. Yes, there are parallels with lives, but you are all individual, you are all uniquely different. So, just to recap again, imagine you've got, let's simplify it. Let's say a car headlight. So, you've put something between it and the wall that that light beam would be projected onto. Now it can be altered in various ways. Maybe having a secreted knowledge that you could then also do other things to it that may have varying effects, maybe used in conjunction with media stories, for example. Putting certain things out into the mainstream media through social media, spreading the word, as it were, or the words of, we call it the hidden hand. It doesn't matter what it actually is. This is, like I said yesterday, we are going somewhere with this. and I will tie all this back in together. While I think of it as well, very nice little short video excerpt from, must have been a live stream, Yolanda TrueLove channel, about fear. That's something I think most people, in one form or another, know exactly what fear is to varying levels, and it's an emotion that, if it's allowed to run riot, can be very detrimental. There is, in the survival mode, a very good reason for it, but when you're not in that life or death situation in, say, a natural environment faced with predator animals, you're faced with a different type of predator. In an urban setting, for example, and in a civilization, shall we say, or a cult, you are a culture, like the Western world. So it's a different type of predator that you're up against that seems to work through manipulation, through the power of suggestion. We'll come on more onto this in another episode, because there's a lot more to this, there's a lot more to discuss, and I think the results and conclusions that I'm going to show may well surprise you. That it's not as clear cut as would at first seem, but it's actually sheer brilliance in the way this whole mechanism works, and it is the mechanism I fully intend to shine a light on. Well, I'll say no more at the moment till the next episode, because it'll probably end up as long as this one. So this one will be going out tomorrow on the 12th. I will put the link in the description to the short TrueLove video about fear. And another one I feel is worth mentioning, and it's one I've listened to and I would highly recommend, is Lana A LaBonte. And she's talking about this. It's basically the modern day version of the biblical flood. You'll notice that in this reality, in this present time, it's all about information and technology, the it. So the modern day flood is not water, it is information. Consider how much there is. Consider, if you're of a certain generation, you will may have known a time where there was no television whatsoever, or a very rare thing that only a few households in the streets may have had. And probably in the early days, there was some sort of like community gathering because of the novelty of the thing. But let's not forget, there was one organization, no matter what else you say about it and how history perceives it, the Third Reich was actually honest, in which they actually said they have a minister of propaganda. There was what other government today actually has a minister of propaganda and openly calls it by that title? The whole Third Reich era was really just a experiment on. It was pioneering the way of using film and using the media and going out amongst the people, touring by train. This is something Adolf Hitler is documented to have done. It was something novel, something new. But there was almost like a test run for the use of the media, and it was under that regime, 1944. There's a recording in stereo in 1944, and yet 2 decades later, you go and buy the latest hit single, and it's still in mono. It took all that time. So there's a proof that technology is held back. It's like, why was that? Why were they not releasing stereo in the late 1940s and in the 1950s? It's an interesting side note. But getting back to the point, this overload of information, you are bombarded with it constantly. And of course, if you focus into it, it's going to get even worse. I'm again speaking from experience here because I rarely look at Facebook or anything because I can feel myself, it's trying to pull me back into it. And it's like, no, I've pulled myself out of that rabbit hole, as it were. Yes, Facebook has been very useful. It's been a great thing to contact with other people, but we're going through this retrograde thing as well, where you've got all apart from Venus and Mars are in retrograde currently. So there's powerful energies, and personally, I'm finding it really good. I mean, I'm thoroughly enjoying this transition, and you'll find, I'm pretty sure you'll find, and this is something I was talking with Lana about earlier today. Circles of friends will change. Your circle of people will change. Some will fall away. It's all part of this spiritual growth process, and there's no right or wrong to it. It's just you outgrow certain things. You just look back at what were the first few things you started looking at and how far you've come in however long you've been doing things, and compare yourself now to where you were 5 or 10 years or whatever years ago, and how your perceptions, how your worldview may have changed. So, yeah, this has gone on rather long, this one. I apologise for that, but it's rather complex, and I like to just let these thoughts just come and flow in a natural way, totally unscripted. Anyway, we are going to end this one now, and there will be more in the next episode, most likely tomorrow, which by the time you hear this will probably be the 13th. So I will say love to you all, and I hope this has helped in some way, bring some clarity or given you something to think about. And don't forget to check the links in the description. Thank you very much.